The wind came dry and restless across the plains of Red Hollow, stirring dust from the drought-hardened ground and whispering against the sun-bleached timbers of an old cabin. Martha Boone stood barefoot on the porch, shotgun slung across her back, eyes fixed on the endless horizon. Her corn had withered weeks ago, her rain barrel was near dry, and for the third straight day, no riders passed the Southern Trail. 3 years had passed since Jacob Boone died from a rattlesnake bite in the field behind the barn, and since then, not a single soul had crossed her threshold without drawing a gun or asking for something they didn't earn. She had learned to trust silence more than voices and solitude more than men. But that evening, just before the sun dipped behind the ridge, she saw something that didn't belong, something half hidden in the tall yellow grass. It moved barely, just enough to remind her that death wasn't the only thing that crawled across the Texas soil. Martha Boone approached the tall grass with her rifle clutched tight in both hands. The sun dipped lower behind her, throwing long shadows across the dust-cracked earth. Every instinct she had honed since Jacob died screamed caution, but there was something about the way the figure lay, still but not lifeless, that pulled her forward. She stopped a few feet away. It was a boy, young, maybe 12, no more. Skin the color of bronzed leather, hair braided tight, a rawhide pouch resting on his chest. His shirt, once soft buckskin, was torn and stained deep red on the left shoulder. A crude bandage, fashioned from grass and sinew, was tied in place. Flies buzzed around the wound, and his lips were dry and cracked with fever. Martha's heart beat loud in her ears. She knew what he was. Comanche. She also knew what folks would say if they found her standing over him. A woman alone in a lawless part of Texas, tending to a wounded Indian boy? It was enough to get her shot or worse, but none of that mattered just then, because he wasn't just a Comanche. He was a child, and he was dying. Martha dropped to her knees beside him. "Hey now," she whispered, not knowing if he understood a word. "Don't you quit." His eyes fluttered open, black, glassy, filled with heat and pain. He didn't flinch, didn't try to move, just watched her, as if unsure whether she was real. Martha pressed the back of her hand to his forehead, burning. She hesitated only a moment before making her decision. "Come on," she muttered and slid her arms beneath him. He was heavier than she expected, muscle and bone, all wiry strength, but she lifted him anyway, groaning as she stood. The boy gritted his teeth against the pain, but didn't cry out. Inside the cabin, she laid him gently on Jacob's old cot. The fire in the hearth had died to embers, and the room smelled of dust, gun oil, and years of stubborn survival. Martha moved fast, setting a pot of water to boil while pulling out her small stash of whiskey, bandages, and sewing thread. He watched her work in silence, every movement deliberate. His fingers twitched once when she lifted his shirt, revealing the bullet wound clean through the shoulder. It hadn't hit bone, but the infection had set in deep. "I'm no doctor," she said under her breath, "but I reckon you'll die if I don't try." She poured whiskey into the wound, and the boy stiffened. His eyes watered, but still he made no sound. "Lord above," she muttered, "you're braver than most grown men." She stitched him up as best she could, short, neat loops with shaking hands. She told him stories while she worked, about Jacob, about the twins they'd lost that first brutal winter, about the time a panther tried to get her chickens and she'd fought it off with a shovel. He didn't speak, not then. Later, as the fire crackled and she coaxed a few spoonfuls of broth into him, he finally did. "Tawakana," he rasped. Martha froze. "Is that your name?" He nodded once, eyes steady, voice like sand. She reached out and touched his forehead again, still hot. "All right, Tawakana," she said softly. "You're safe here." But even as she said it, she knew it wasn't true. Not entirely, because someone had shot him. Someone was looking for him. And if they found him here, no name or good intention would save her. That night, Martha didn't sleep. She sat in the rocker by the door, shotgun across her knees and eyes on the horizon. Every howl of wind, every creak of timber set her nerves alight. But the boy slept, fevered and twitching, but alive. And by dawn, Martha Boone had already made up her mind. She'd keep him hidden, come what may. By sunrise, Martha had already boiled fresh water, ground herbs for tea, and reinforced the lock on her door. Not that it would stop bullets. She glanced back at Tawakana, still asleep on Jacob's cot, his breath steady but shallow. The fever had broken, but the worst wasn't behind them. Not yet. She stepped outside, Winchester in hand, and scanned the horizon. Nothing but scrub brush, prairie grass, and the distant silhouette of Buzzard's Bluff to the north. Still, something felt wrong. The air had that thick, expectant weight to it, the kind that settles just before lightning strikes. She moved to the well and drew a bucket, her eyes never leaving the open plain. That's when she heard it. Hoofbeats. Not the clumsy stumble of a lost cow or the rolling gait of a Mustang. These were fast, purposeful. 3 riders at least, maybe more. Martha dropped the bucket and rushed inside. "Tawakana!" she hissed, bolting the door behind her. The boy stirred. When he tried to sit, a grunt of pain escaped him. "Stay down," she said, dragging a quilt up over him and tossing a sack of flour on top for good measure. She grabbed her rifle, then stepped to the window. 3 men rode into view, 2 Texas Rangers and 1 local rancher. Martha recognized the third immediately, Samuel Harlan, a cruel-mouthed settler with more rifles than friends. They dismounted just outside the fence. The lead ranger, tall and sharp-featured, removed his hat. "Mornin', ma'am," he called. "Name's Captain Elias Warren. Mind if we speak with you a spell?" Martha opened the door but didn't step aside. "Depends what about." "We're tracking a wounded Comanche boy," he said, tone polite but firm. "Got blood trail leads close to your land." "I haven't seen any Indians," Martha lied smoothly. "Not since the raid 2 months back." Harlan leaned forward in his saddle. "The boy's dangerous. Could be a scout for a war party. You'd be doing the whole valley a favor if you told us where he is." Warren shot Harlan a look but said nothing. Martha folded her arms. "The only thing I've seen out here is the wind and too little rain. You think he's here? You're welcome to look. But I won't be bullied." The ranger nodded. "We won't trouble you long." She stepped aside, letting them into the cabin. Her heart thudded against her ribs as the men moved inside, scanning every corner. Tawakana lay perfectly still under the covers. Martha had arranged it so his body looked like a pile of supplies. She'd scattered firewood near the cot and tossed a few of Jacob's coats over top. The search was quick, almost perfunctory. Warren lifted a corner of the quilt, then dropped it again. "Seems clear." But Harlan didn't move. He was staring at the floor near the hearth. "What's that?" he said, pointing to a patch of dried blood Martha had tried to scrub clean. "Rabbit," she said instantly. "Caught one in a trap yesterday." Warren gave a half nod. Harlan didn't buy it. His fingers inched toward the colt on his hip. "You know what I think?" he sneered. "I think you're lying. I think you found that Comanche boy, and you're hiding him like he's one of your own." "Get off my land, Mr. Harlan," Martha said, voice low but unwavering. "She's protecting him," Harlan snarled. "Just like that other settler woman who got strung up outside Sweetwater." Warren's voice cracked like a whip. "Enough," Harlan wheeled on him. "We can't just let this go." "I said that's enough, Samuel." The captain's hand hovered over his own holster. "We got no proof. No boy, no warrant. If we push this, we're the ones who'll end up explaining things to the judge." Martha held Warren's gaze. "There's nothing here worth finding. You've looked. Now kindly leave." Tense silence stretched between them, until finally the ranger tipped his hat. "Good day, Mrs. Boone." The 3 men mounted up. Harlan was the last to turn, his eyes narrowing. "You think they'll thank you for this? That boy's kin'll come for you next." "Let him," she said, and shut the door. Inside, the silence was deafening. Tawakana stirred beneath the quilt. "You risk much," he murmured. She looked at him, startled. "You understood all that?" He nodded. "English is slow, but I learn." Martha leaned against the door, finally allowing her knees to buckle. "They'll be back," she said softly. "Next time with more men. Maybe worse." Tawakana sat up slowly, teeth gritted. "Then I must leave." "No," she said, surprising herself. "Not yet. You're not strong enough." He met her gaze. "You stay in danger because of me." Martha exhaled. "We're both in danger, but I reckon it's better than leaving you to die out there." Tawakana looked away. the weight of debt heavy in his young eyes. That night, as the wind stirred the grasses and the fire burned low, Martha loaded her rifle once more. The storm she'd felt in the air hadn't broken yet, but it was coming. She just didn't know from which direction. By morning, Tawakana was on his feet again, though barely. He stood at the window, shoulder wrapped tight, eyes sharp as flint. Martha watched him from across the cabin, kneading biscuit dough with practiced care, pretending not to notice how alert he'd become. "You should sit," she said, voice gentle. "I sit too long already," he muttered. "If I cannot move, I am prey." Martha didn't argue. She knew the truth in his words. The prairie didn't wait for the weak to catch up. It swallowed them. They ate in silence. Hard biscuits, boiled beans, the last of the smoked venison. Supplies were low, water too. And if the Rangers returned, or worse, someone less inclined to ask questions, they'd need strength to run. "Do you think your father is looking for you?" she asked as she cleared the tin plates. Tawakana nodded. "He knows I fall behind. He follows my trail." He hesitated. "But others might find me first." "Others?" He turned to the window. "Yamparika, a splinter band, angry men. They fight for war, not peace." Martha stiffened. "Are they looking for you?" "They always watch. They don't want peace with whites. If they find me here—" He stopped, eyes narrowing. "They kill you. And me." Martha stared at him. "Even if I saved you?" "Especially because you saved me," he said. Before she could respond, a sound cut through the air. Hoofbeats. Again. Martha grabbed her rifle, nodding for Tawakana to get down, but he didn't move. "No Rangers," he whispered. "Not their rhythm." She peeked through the shutter. A small group of riders approached, 4 in all, not in uniform, no flags. One carried a long rifle strapped across his back. Another wore a buffalo hide jacket, feathers braided into his hair. "Comanche?" she whispered. Tawakana shook his head. "Not ours." Martha's breath caught. The riders halted 50 yards out. The one with the feathers raised a hand. No weapons drawn, but no sign of peace either. "They're scouts," Tawakana said. "Yamparika, maybe. Maybe Apache." "What do we do?" "We don't run," he said quietly. "Running shows guilt." He walked toward the door. "Wait," Martha whispered. "You're still wounded." "I must speak. They see you hide me. It is worse." Before she could protest, he stepped outside. Martha followed, rifle at her side. The leader of the riders dismounted and approached. His face was painted in ochre and ash, his hair bound in war braids. He eyed Martha coldly before turning to Tawakana. Words in Comanche passed between them, sharp, rapid fire. Tawakana's voice was firm, unwavering. Then a silence. The rider looked at Martha again, then spit into the dust. He spoke a few more words to Tawakana, then turned back to his horse. The others followed, silent as ghosts. In seconds they were gone, riding north into the heat shimmer. Martha waited for Tawakana to explain. "They know me," he said quietly, "but they don't follow my father." "What did they say?" "They said you shame me, that you're poison." "And what did you say?" "I said you had more honor than men who leave a boy to die." Martha's throat tightened. She looked away, pretending to watch the horizon. Tawakana stepped beside her, face solemn. "They will tell others. Word spreads fast. My father must reach us soon." Martha nodded. "Then we hold." That afternoon she prepared what she could. Extra water from the well, a pouch of jerky and hardtack buried in a jar. She cleaned the rifle, checked the windows, moved Jacob's cot further from the door. Tawakana helped where he could. He wasn't strong enough to carry firewood, but he tracked movement beyond the ridge, pointed out signs she missed, broken branches, disturbed stones, a rabbit trail altered by boot prints. "They watch," he said simply. "Someone always watches." Night fell without incident, but neither of them slept. At one point, Martha lit a small oil lamp and sat by the hearth. Tawakana joined her, sitting cross-legged like a child, but with the weariness of a man far older. "You lost someone?" he asked suddenly. Martha blinked. "Yes, my husband. 3 years ago, rattlesnake bite." He nodded. "My brother, taken by fever last winter." They were quiet for a time. Then Martha said, "Sometimes I talk to Jacob. out loud, like he's still here. Is that mad? Tawakana looked at her, his eyes calm. Not mad. In my people, we speak to those who've crossed. Sometimes they answer. In dreams. Martha smiled faintly. Then I hope Jacob's listening, because we're going to need all the help we can get. Outside, the wind picked up. A lone coyote howled in the distance, and from the north, faint but growing louder, came the steady beat of drums. Not thunder, not horses, drums. Tawakana stood slowly. His eyes met Martha's. They come, he said. The morning wind carried more than dust. It carried warning. Martha stood on her porch, a tin coffee cup in one hand, her eyes fixed on the faint horse tracks cutting across the dry earth near the edge of her field. They hadn't been there yesterday. She knew every crease in this land, every pattern made by wind or boot. These prints didn't belong to settlers or deer. These belonged to scouts. Inside the cabin, Tawakana stirred his stew without eating. His eyes flicked toward the window. They're watching, he said. Not my father's men. Others. Martha nodded grimly. I know. They had survived 3 days together under one fragile roof, nursing wounds, exchanging stories, understanding just enough of each other's languages to bridge the quiet. But now that time was up. Someone else had found the boy. And whoever they were, they hadn't come to talk. That afternoon she spotted them, 3 riders atop the ridge across the creek. They didn't approach, just lingered like smoke, one holding a spyglass, the others still as grave markers. Martha didn't wave, didn't move, just stared back until they turned and rode off, dust curling behind them like warning flags. They know, Tawakana said quietly behind her. She turned. They do. What now? Martha looked out at her fields, her small barn, the dying corn. She'd buried a husband out there beneath the cottonwoods. If it came to violence, it wouldn't be the first time blood soaked this land, but it would break something she wasn't sure could be mended. We wait, she said, and we prepare. That night, Martha moved the cot away from the window and rolled her Winchester in a quilt by the door. She lit only one lamp and placed a kettle on the stove to keep steam on the glass. It wouldn't stop a bullet, but it would obscure shadows. Tawakana sat cross-legged by the fire, sharpening his blade slowly, his face unreadable. I think they don't want me alive. Martha looked up. Why? He hesitated. I carry secrets. My father told me of meetings, talks with white men, treaties not yet signed. Some Comanche want war instead. You're proof he means peace, she realized aloud. He nodded once. They fear that. Outside, the night deepened. The fire crackled. And just before the oil lamp guttered out, Martha saw something she hadn't noticed before. The edge of her well had been disturbed. Not dug, not damaged, just inspected. Someone was measuring how long she could last. At dawn, she filled her canteens and set traps further out, where rabbits still nested. Tawakana insisted on coming. If I stay inside, I grow weak. I must feel the land. They moved through the mesquite thickets like ghosts, quiet and watchful. He showed her how to read branches for fresh breaks, how to feel wind against her cheeks to know if others had passed. She taught him how to spot deer runs by the way grass bent near water. It was strange, this sharing of survival. But the signs weren't good. A cold fire pit under a cedar, hoof prints circling her property, and the most chilling of all, a single feather, black dipped, hung from a branch at the forest's edge. Tawakana stopped cold. Yamparika, war mark, your enemies? He looked at her, solemn. Enemies to peace, not just to me. Back at the cabin, they found more evidence. Shutters bent, boot prints near the back door. Her late husband's coat, gone from the drying line. Whoever they were, they wanted her to know they'd been close, and they wanted her to feel it. They'll come before dawn, Tawakana said. Martha exhaled. Then we'll be ready before they are. She spent the afternoon loading ammunition and checking hinges. Tawakana fashioned a spear from an old fence post, wrapping the blade in leather to muffle sound. He even set small traps by the windows, noisemakers of tin cans and broken glass. As evening came, Martha sat with him on the porch, watching the horizon fade. The boy's voice broke the silence. You were afraid that first day. I was. But you stayed. I did. Why? She looked at him, this child who had become something more than a burden, more than a symbol. Because you were dying, and because I've lost people before. I know what that silence feels like. He nodded. You gave me a life debt. I didn't do it for a debt. I know, he said. That's why it matters. They sat together until the stars rose and the wind carried the first hints of something colder than the night before. Intent, waiting in the dark beyond the hills. The wind shifted just after midnight. Martha woke to the sound of the tin noisemaker rattling softly outside the cabin. Not loud, not a full alarm, just enough to say they were testing, watching, counting windows, measuring fear. She reached for the Winchester tucked under her bed, then looked across the room. Tawakana was already awake, crouched low with his knife, eyes trained on the door. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. They both knew the time was close. I'll stoke the fire, she said quietly. No, he whispered back. Let it die. Dark is friend now. So she left it. Let the coals cool. The light vanished from the windows. The room grew cold, but safer. In the silence, Martha heard it again. Hoofbeats. Distant but closing. Riders. At least 4, maybe 5. She pulled on her boots, heart hammering against her ribs. Outside, the coyotes had gone still. Even the wind held its breath. Then came the knock. Not frantic, not even angry. Just deliberate. A statement. We're here, and we're not in a hurry. Martha glanced at Tawakana. He shook his head slightly. Don't answer. But she stepped forward anyway, stopping a foot from the door. Who is it? She called, voice steady as she could manage. A pause, then a man's voice, rough and familiar. Samuel Crawford, ma'am. Sheriff's deputy out of Devil's Creek. She hadn't seen Crawford in over a year, not since the last town hall meeting where he'd argued that all Comanche should be driven north by gunpoint. He wasn't a lawman then, just a loud settler with a big family and a bigger grudge. Now he had a badge and a reason to knock. We're tracking a wounded boy, Crawford continued, voice too polite. He's wanted for questioning. Last seen near your property. Boy's not here, Martha said. A lie, but not entirely. Tawakana was no boy anymore. Not after all this. Another pause. You wouldn't lie to a deputy, would you, ma'am? The edge in his voice finally showed. Behind her, Tawakana moved silently to the other window. He peered out, then gestured 2 fingers. 2 more men behind the barn. They were trying to encircle. Martha gripped the rifle tighter. I've got nothing but an old fence, 2 chickens, and bad coffee, she replied. If you've come for trouble, I suggest you move on. You'd really protect one of them? Crawford's voice sharpened. After what they've done, you want people thinking you're one of their sympathizers? I saved a dying child, she snapped. If that's a crime now, go ahead and shoot me for it. For a few seconds, there was only silence outside. Then the sound of boots moving across dirt. Someone kicked at her porch steps. A moment later, a fist slammed hard against the door. Tawakana was beside her now, knife ready, teeth clenched. We fight? Not unless we have to, she whispered, but we hold the line. Another voice shouted from the darkness. Crawford again. You got it till sunrise to change your mind, widow? After that, we don't knock. Then came the hoofbeats again, receding this time. They were pulling back, regrouping. Maybe to fetch more men. Maybe just to let fear do their work overnight. When they were gone, Martha exhaled for the first time in minutes. Her hands were shaking now, her breath caught in her chest like a trapped bird. We won't survive a siege, she said finally. I know, Tawakana answered, but we won't die alone. At dawn, the land was quiet, too quiet. Martha climbed to the roof with her spyglass, an old cavalry tool Jacob had once used to spot game. Now she searched for danger instead of deer. And there they were. 7 riders waiting at the southern ridge. More were likely hidden. She recognized Crawford by his hat and the tall man beside him. Jonas Langtree, a rancher who lost 2 sons during last year's raids. Men driven by grief more than orders. They mean to force our hand, she said. Tawakana stood below, tightening a strip of leather over his healed shoulder. Then we move first. You mean run? He shook his head. Number we send a message. He pulled a rawhide pouch from his satchel and opened it. Inside were crushed herbs, dried petals, and powdered ochre. Carefully, he formed a symbol on a flat stone, an eagle's wing above a river. Peace sign, one even the Yamparika scouts would recognize. We put it where they'll see it, he said. Then wait. And if they don't care, Tawakana met her eyes. Then they've already chosen war. Martha rode out before noon alone. She carried no weapon in hand, just the stone tied to a long stick. She planted it upright on the ridge between her cabin and the Crawford line. A neutral ground. A chance. Then she rode back slowly, never turning her back, never showing fear. By dusk, it was still standing, and a second sign appeared beside it, an arrow unbroken, wrapped in white cloth. Tawakana smiled when he saw it. They wait, he said. One day, then they come. Martha nodded. Then we prepare for the day after. Because peace never held without teeth behind it. Because sometimes surviving the night meant believing the dawn might listen. The riders came just after sunrise. Martha saw them first, a slow line of silhouettes cresting the ridge like ghosts reborn from prairie dust. Some wore badges, others the hard faces of grieving ranchers. And at their front rode Samuel Crawford, rifle across his lap, eyes locked on the cabin ahead. But he wasn't alone. Riding parallel, yet not in formation, came a second group, Comanche warriors, less in number but equal in presence. At their center was Quanah, chief of the Quahati, tall and watchful, face unreadable. The two groups didn't look at each other, but they rode toward the same place, toward Martha cabin, toward a reckoning. Inside, Martha had made no attempt to hide. The door was unbarred. The rifle lay across the table, untouched. And between her and the window, Tawakana stood straight-backed, a ceremonial sash tied over his healed shoulder. You sure about this? She asked. I am. Even if they come shooting, he glanced at her, eyes calm. Then I'll fall standing. Outside, the horses stopped. Crawford was the first to dismount. He spat into the dirt, paced a few steps, then called out, We've had enough talk. Enough waiting. You've got a savage in your house. We're here to finish this. Before Martha could reply, another voice rang out. Quanah's. He spoke in Comanche, low and deliberate. Tawakana stepped forward and answered in kind, his voice stronger than she'd ever heard it. What did he say? She whispered. He said the boy you hunt is under his protection now. That blood answers for blood, but not this day. Crawford laughed bitterly. You think a painted chief gets to speak for the law out here? Then Herbert Mitchell rode forward. He hadn't chosen a side. Not yet. He'd buried 2 sons, but he'd also held his daughter after Comanche warriors brought her back alive. His eyes found Martha's, then Tawakana's, and then finally Crawford's. You don't speak for us anymore, Sam, he said quietly. This boy helped save my daughter. That chief kept his word, and I won't see this land turned to fire again because of your hate. Crawford looked around and saw only silence behind him. The men who'd followed him to the ridge now shifted uncomfortably in their saddles. No one raised a weapon. Not yet. He cursed, turned back toward the cabin. And you, Martha, still proud of your pet Comanche? Still think he's different? She stepped out onto the porch. I don't think he's different, she said. I know he is, just like I know you're not. Crawford's jaw clenched. His hand went to his belt. And then Quanah moved, not fast, not threatening, just forward. Calm, composed. He held up something wrapped in cloth. He unwrapped it slowly, deliberately, revealing a cavalry saber. Blood-stained, dented, familiar. This, he said in broken English, was taken from Mitchell's son. Recovered from men who followed Kickingbird. Not my warriors, not this boy's hand. He laid the saber in the dirt. Mitchell dismounted, walked forward, picked it up, and nodded. The truth, unspoken but undeniable, settled across the ridge like a storm breaking. Crawford's hand dropped, and with it, the threat. That night, the cabin held more people than ever before. Settlers and Comanche sat around the same fire. Tawakana told stories in both languages, his words weaving a bridge with every sentence. Mitchell passed around a jug. Even one of the rangers laughed. The impossible had happened. Not peace, not yet, but something close enough to try again tomorrow. Later, as the fire burned low, Martha stepped aside. Quanah approached, nodding once in gratitude. "You gave him back to me," he said. "Now I give you something too." He handed her a small pouch, soft leather, hand-stitched. Inside was a single eagle feather, bound in red thread. Martha blinked, overwhelmed. "This is your people's way?" she asked. He nodded. "For those who carry peace through danger, for those who don't run when others do." She held it to her heart. "Thank you," she whispered. Tawakana found her just before dawn. He had packed his things. The boy was leaving, but not as a fugitive now, not as a hunted enemy. "I go with my father," he said, "to speak peace. Maybe build more cabins like this." "You're ready," she replied. "Just promise me one thing." He tilted his head. "If you ever send smoke from Yellow Ridge," she said, "make sure it's for good news." He grinned. "Next smoke is a story. You'll see." Then he turned, mounted his pony, and rode into the horizon, into legend. As the first light spread across the Texas plains, Martha stood alone on her porch. The eagle feather danced in the wind above her door. And though the world would never be perfect, never easy, one truth stood taller than the rest. She had chosen mercy over fear, and mercy had answered, not with silence, but with peace. If this story stirred something in you, if you found yourself rooting for peace when war seemed easier, or believing that a single act of mercy could ripple across generations, then I want to hear from you. Would you have done what Martha did? Could you have looked past fear and seen a wounded child, not an enemy? Let me know in the comments. Your thoughts matter here, because these aren't just stories about the past. They're reflections of the choices we all face, even now. And if you want more tales of grit, grace, and unexpected humanity on the wild frontier, don't forget to like, subscribe, and ring that bell. Tomorrow, another story is waiting, one that just might change how you see the West and yourself. Until then, keep the fire burning and the bridges strong.